In the previous session, we spent a little time listening to a few examples of French house music, and they range from the well-known Stardust to some of the more popular Cried Amore releases, and we even had a quick listen to Daft Punk. Now, I hope you listened closely to the previous session, and in particular to what was sampled, because the key to writing any successful French house record is down to what you sample. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about what original record was sampled, although obviously that's going to be important, and I'm not on about copyright. What I'm on about is the actual musical segment that was sampled. You see, the thing is, when you're building a house track, and more particularly when you're looking for something to sample, it really isn't just a case of, that sounds great, let's take it, because it doesn't work like that. You have to be incredibly careful on what you choose to sample, because, well, essentially, you're planning on building a 6-minute record from nothing more than a couple of bars of sampled music. Now, what that means is that in order to build a track out of what, in the grand scheme of things, is essentially an incredibly short sample, that musical segment that you sample, it has to be fairly specific in terms of the pitch, the tone, and the timbre. Just like most of the examples in the previous session, they all shared that very familiar structure, and that's because the artists were well aware of what they were sampling. Now, I suspect that by saying that, some of you are probably considering jumping back to the previous session to listen to them again and try and pick out what I'm talking about, but there's no need for that, because I am going to go over it again here. But basically, session 1 was just that. It was to teach you a lesson. Now, one of the problems with practicing producers is that they don't develop on the hearing. They still behave like the rest of the public when it comes to music. They hear it, but they don't actually listen to it. And there is a huge difference between hearing a piece of music and actually listening to it. For example, listen to this piece of music here. Right, I've given you about 30 seconds of that music track there, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you a few questions now, and no cheating by rewinding this video. First of all, was there a bass line? And if there was, what was it doing? Did it change in pitch? Was it an offbeat bass line? Was it a real bass or a synthesized one? How many pitches did it use if it did change? What drums were there? Well, there was a kick, but what else was there? Was it a clap or a snare? With there open hi-hats? With the closed hi-hats? Was there a cymbal in there? Was there a melody? If there was, what did the melody play? Did it stay at a constant tone, or did it rise and fall in pitch? What instrument was used for it? Did you hear any effects in there? Was the delay used on anything? How about reverb, chorus, filter? How did the arrangement build? Now, all that's going to seem like an awful lot of questions, especially when you had less than 30 seconds to listen to it, but you do need to train yourself to hear all those things in every piece of music, no matter how short the segment of it may be. Every time you hear a piece of music, you need to learn to mentally dissect it, place it in its constituent parts, and see if you can hear any special production tricks. Now, there's no shortcuts to learning how to do this. The only way to do it is to basically practice it over and over and over again until it becomes almost your second nature to listen to music in that way. And once you can do that, you'll open up a whole new world to yourself, and one that's going to make this style of production a hell of a lot easier for you. It is a technique that is absolutely vital if you want to produce French house music. You need to be able to listen to a piece of music, dissect it, and hear it in the context of something else. Now, to better explain that, what we're going to do is we're going to rewind to the previous session and listen to some of the examples from there. And we're going to start with Fate, Chaka Khan. Now, the first question we have to ask there is, how much of that was sampled? Well, let's listen to the sample part that Stardust took. Well, basically, we could say that there's 3 tones in there. Now, listening to them, what do they do? Well, they rise in pitch. Now, let's listen to another one. We'll put Leo Sayer on. Apart from the fact, I bet you never thought you'd be listening to Leo Sayer on a dance music production DVD. What did the Buffalo Bunch sample there? Well, there you can hear it's only really 2 parts, but like the Chaka Khan sample that Stardust took, it rises in pitch again. Let's listen to another, for example, Cassius. Now that one's vocals, but again, if you listen to them, they rise in pitch. And almost all French house music will do this. I mean, if you listen to, for example, Eric Pride's Valerie, you're going to hear the same effect here with Call on Me. I'll just play some of that back. Now, nearly all French house records share this very same aspect. They'll all sample parts of a record that move up in pitch towards the end. Now, when I say that, there are exceptions to this rule. There always are in music, but in general, we can say that when you're looking to sample part of a record, you need to search out a good part, and basically, that means you're listening out for a part that rises in pitch towards the end of the sample segment. Now, that's pretty much imperative. It doesn't really have to rise in pitch, but it must change in pitch because you've got to build a 5-minute track out of this. Now, another thing when we're looking for a sample is it's easy to think in terms of the low-end energy. We're writing dance music here after all, and the main focus is on that LFE, the low-frequency energy, the bass and the kick thumping along. But when you're looking for a sample, it's imperative that you ignore that low end and only listen for the high end frequency range. And when I say that, what I mean is basically we want to listen out for funky melodic parts, vocal snippets, funky disco guitars, the high end instruments. The one thing we really don't want to be listening for is that bass part. No matter how funky it may sound, we don't want to touch that. Now, as I said before, there's always exceptions to that rule, and some artists have sampled the bass, but as a whole, you need to learn to ignore that bottom end of the record you're looking to sample, and the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, dance music, especially today, it's evolved a heavy, deep bottom end. The bottom end energy of records, the LFE of dance records, is incredibly heavy. And so if you're looking for a bass end and you sample that, you're still going to have to back it up with another heavier bass so that it maintains the LFE that we expect in today's dance music. And you can't just jump in there with EQ and try and boost that LFE because, well, you'll just end up introducing noise. And on top of that, we're no doubt going to be time stretching the audio, and bass is a long frequency waveform, and stretching that can be precarious. If we time stretch the upper frequencies, it doesn't really matter if they go that little bit weird or a little bit awry. We're able to get away with that because it's not forming the fundamental low-end balance of the record. On a fundamental level, people don't dance to the upper frequencies. It helps with the track, but the audience obtain their rhythm, what they dance to from the low frequencies, the timing of the kick and the movement of the bass. Now, if we were to sample a bass line and then we time stretch that, what we're doing there is we're actually playing with the fundamental aspect of the dance record. We're playing with the foundations of the dance record. And I guarantee you that if you start playing around with that, it's going to come out sounding a bit wobbly or insecure. And no matter how much you try and fix it, it'll never have that solid feel that the bottom end of a record requires. So when you're looking for sampling, try and listen out just for the higher end energy, those high frequency instruments. Now, another important aspect when we're looking for samples and something that we always have to bear in mind is that we're not writing hip hop or rap. And when I say that, I mean, it's not our intention to sample a full song or even 8 bars of a song. The reason behind our sampling is essentially write a new record, and to do that we need to try and sample out of context of the original. We really don't want the original to be that easily identifiable. The examples in this session and the earlier session were good examples of how to sample out of context. We'll actually have an example here. What I'll do, I'll play you some Chaka Khan again and Fate. Now, if you listen to what Stardust took there, they didn't take the full riff. They took it halfway through. Stardust took this part. Now, when that's repeated, although it still remains as a Chaka Khan record, it does create a whole new feeling, and in doing so, a whole new record. So, when we start to look for samples, we're not looking to take from the beginning of the bar. We're basically looking to take something halfway through the bar, after the first few notes, so that we can sample something out of context with the original record. Basically, if we take the first few notes of the bar, it's going to be much more identifiable to the original and more difficult to take it in a different direction. Now, I may just be showing my age here, but I don't know if any of you remember a program called Name That Tune. And basically, the contestants on there would turn around and say, I'll name that tune in 3. And they play the first 3 notes of a record, and that's because our minds can focus in, and when we hear the beginning of a record, we know what that record is. You take it out of context, it can sound totally different. I mean, of course, there's going to be exceptions to that, and sometimes we may have to take from the start of the bar, but if that's the case, there's nothing stopping us from cutting up a sample into individual bars and swapping and changing it around a little. Now, the one important final factor to all these records using samples is that of the Stockhausen effect. Now, essentially, the Stockhausen effect is the effect we feel when we listen to something that does nothing but constantly repeat over and over and over again. And what happens is our minds switch off to it, and it becomes nothing more than background noise. If you live on a busy road with cars driving past constantly, you've no doubt suffered the Stockhausen effect. You no longer really notice the cars anymore. You know that they're there, but they don't really affect your daily life. You don't pick up on it. But if someone who lives on a cul-de-sac calls around, they pick up on it immediately because they've not learnt to drown it out. They've not experienced the Stockhausen effect with those cars. Now, house music by its very nature is repetitive, but if you've seen the Fundamental 1 DVD on drum programming that we did, you'll already know that it isn't that repetitive. While the music may repeat, we do add small changes to keep interest and prevent that Stockhausen effect from taking place. Now, when we're working with sample bits of music, we do generally require greater changes than that. If we were to sample a small 2-bar segment of a record and continue to repeat that over and over and over again, it's eventually going to send people to sleep. So to avoid this, what we do is at the end of 3 bars or 7 bars or 15 bars or 31 bars, we introduce another sample from the same record, but a different part of the sample, which then completes the cycle, the 32-bar cycle or the 8-bar cycle. A really good example of this actually is Eric Pride's Valerie. What I'll do, I'll just play this part back and you'll be able to hear it. It's the most obvious example of this. Now you'll have heard that there. You've got the call on me and then I'm the same boy I used to be. Now that occurs in all French house records, or at least most French house records. For example, we'll listen to Stardust again and you'll be able to hear it here. You could hear it just there at the end of the bar there, where it just changed slightly. Now, we always need to inject some kind of penultimate loop bar change into our music, but how often that occurs is entirely up to you. If you're looking for a chart-topping hit, then apart from the very best luck to you, it should generally occur every 4 or 8 bars. But in club music, it doesn't have to occur so quickly because a lot of our listeners are generally dabbling with pharmaceuticals. So provided it does occur eventually, you can get away with longer segments. Generally speaking, I like to prevent the Stockhausen every 16 bars, but you can stretch that out to 32 or even 64 depending on what you've sampled and the type of music. So from all this, what we can basically do is we can list our set of sampling guidelines. Now, when we're looking for a sample, we want to follow these guidelines as closely as possible. 1, we're looking to sample a segment, a small part, perhaps 2 bars, maybe 3. And in these, we're looking for instrumentation that will move up in pitch, or at least move in pitch, to add some movement to our record. 2, we're not listening for the bass. In fact, we're trying to ignore the bass altogether because at this stage, at the moment when we're looking for a sample, it's not important. So when we are listening, we're listening for the higher pitched instruments, the high frequency range, such as the vocals, the strings, the horns, the guitars, and so forth. 3, when we take these high frequency instruments, we don't take all of it. We essentially take it out of context of the original melody. We try and take it part way through, a few notes in if possible, and we try to avoid taking it from the beginning and running all the way through. To successfully pull this off, we need to ensure that we work out of context from the original, otherwise we remain too close to the original and it turns more into a remix than a French house record. And finally, we should always look to sample a little more than we originally intended so we can run our bar ending and avoid our Stockhausen effect. So what we're going to do now is knowing those guidelines there, we're going to employ these techniques and we're going to have a go at finding a sample, and this is where things can become a little more complicated. Basically what it is while we could just listen to a number of different songs here now and pick out ones we think may work, the problem we've got is we've got to put them in our sequencer. We've got to find the part we want, then we've got to loop that part, possibly time stretch it and hope that time stretching doesn't ruin our sound. Perhaps pitch it up, and after all that, our choice may not even work. So if we look at many of the artists who've released these French house records, they're all DJs. And there's a good reason for that, is that if you're on a turntable, it's pretty easy to speed up a record to hear if it'll work. So to make this a lot easier on us, what we need to do is basically need to become bedroom DJs to do this. Now personally, I use a Pioneer CDJ 200. Unfortunately, I don't have the capabilities to record outside of a Mac. I do on a video camera, but I can't exactly say that filming's my greatest hobby, and it's certainly not a professional HD camera, so I don't want to ruin this video by introducing some shaky cam of a CDJ that's all blurry, so you'll have to forgive me here when I say here's a picture of a CDJ 200. Now basically I use one of these because they allow me to perform a number of duties quite simply. The first thing, and possibly the best, is that it plays MP3s. Now that means that I can take 70 or 80 MP3s, burn them to a CD and just pop them in the CDJ. Secondly, as you can see from that picture there, it has a pitch and a speed control, and that means I can adjust the pitch and the speed of the record if I need to. And on top of that, it also offers a looping function, and with that I can basically choose where to start a loop, where to end the loop, and have that constantly repeat over and over and over again while I listen to it and play with the pitch and the tempo. And on top of that, it also has 3 effects: a phaser, a filter, and a turntable, although on the Pioneer, as you can see there, they call it the Jet, the Zip, and the wah. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need to purchase one of these units or even a similar one, but if this is your genre of choice and you want to write this style of music, then well, a deck like this is pretty much an imperative purchase. It's going to be the main tool that's going to give you the main element of your music. And so much so, I'd said, for this style of music, this CDJ or something similar is just as important as your sequencer. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to listen to some tracks and see if we can find something that's sample worthy and hopefully use that to build a track for this DVD. I basically have a CD inserted into my CDJ here, and what good is going to jump through some tracks and play around and try and find something that works. We'll use looping, pitching, tempo adjustments, so forth on each and find something. You'll have to forgive me if some of these loops are a bit out because I'm trying to think about what I'm going to say to you and listen to this, and I'm a man, I can't multitask. So let's try this anyway. Let's just play some of this back and see if we can find something that we can make a track out of. I've got 5 or 6 CDs here, so this could keep us quite busy for a while. I'm just looping that there now, and I can speed that up. I could keep that at the same pitch if I wanted to, just while I adjust the speed or change pitch. I'll introduce some effects in there. And basically that's how it works. So what we'll do is, obviously we don't want to sample that because that's a low frequency element. So what we'll do is we'll play through now and we'll have a listen to some really high pitched instruments to see if we can get something going. This seems heavily based around the bass, so I think we'll shift on the track there. What's next? Looping that one there. Let's take that bottom end out. No. Well, that's already been used. Try the next one. Loop that. Well, basically there we've got our high pitch. It does move up in pitch. We've also got the end of it there as well. Let's cut that loop up a bit. That's not bad. We'll write that one down, and we'll move on. No, not impressed with that one. Let's leave that there. We've got our changes in pitch at the top there, at the high frequency. I think actually we'll use that. Chic that. I reckon we can do something with that. I think we can do something with that. What we'll do is we'll get that one down. I'll start recording that into Logic. Just set up here. Oops. Turn that off.